Getting America back on track. Bill Martinez live.
You know, you wonder about the resources that are wasted, the fact that here we are looking at $20 trillion in debt. We've been so frustrated over the years, certainly, you know, those of us baby boomers who have seen this country time and again miss the mark. This is why it's so important that we get this country back on track. I mean, what kind of country are we going to turn over, you know, to our children and our grandchildren? This is what concerns me greatly. I know it does you as well. So welcome to Bill Martinez Live as the discussion continues. And what we're going to talk about next is really symptomatic of the same thing that's been happening here in America, and that is the rewrite, the disturbing rewrite of history. In this particular case, the title of this book is Reclaiming Israel's History, Roots, Rights, and the Struggle for Peace. David Brog is with us right now. A little bit on David's background so you can appreciate what we have here. David is a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, executive director of the Maccabee Task Force, and was the founding executive director of Christians United for Israel. He served as chief of staff to Senator Arlen Specter and staff director of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He also worked as an executive at America Online, practiced corporate law in both Israel and the United States. David Brog, welcome to Bill Martinez Live. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks a lot for having me, Bill.
Hey, great to have you here, to talk about Israel. I mean, there's so much misunderstood, and even to this day, with all the discussion that's been, taking place, for those of us, and I will give, full disclosure here, I have supported CUFI, Christians United for Israel, for a long time. In fact, last year, went to Israel, with a group of, CUFI, enthusiasts and members and pastors, and it was a real blessing. It really opened my eyes to, what is happening, the reality and how much we're not getting in terms of information here in the United States about Israel. And meanwhile, we're in this 50-year battle. It seems to be an untenable and impossible battle of trying to get peace there in Israel.
Well, first of all, Bill, glad to connect with a CUFI member, and I hope that trip was a blessing for you.
Oh, I tell you, endlessly, David. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I am not grateful, because over the years, I've invited many times, and every time I was to go, there was, we could say all hell was breaking loose, and my family would say, Dad, probably not a good time to go. But this time I really felt this was the time to go, and there were still some crazy things that were going on. I mean, even up until, as I told our audience, the day before we left, there was a woman in Bethlehem. We weren't even allowed. I mean, here's a group of Christians wanting to go to the birthplace of Jesus. We weren't allowed to go to Bethlehem, okay?
That's right.
And the day before we left, a woman is murdered in the presence of her 4 children by a radical in her own home.
Yeah. You were there during what they call the stabbing intifada.
Exactly.
And, this is exactly right. What I wanted to do, in a sense, was to take the experience you had in Israel and what you learned in Israel and bottle it, to put it into a book so people who can't get over there can at least understand the history and the truth. Why is it that Palestinian young men were going into their mother's kitchens and taking long knives out and wandering over to their Jewish neighbors, and in the case when you were there, stabbing a mother to death while the children were in the home, and this mother heroically pulled the knife deeper into her own gut so that the terrorists couldn't take it and use it to kill the rest of her children.
Right.
Why is that? I believe it's because that young Palestinian is raised and he's taught lies about the conflict. He's taught that the Jewish people have no connection to the land of Israel and no right to be there. Remember, Yasser Arafat, the prior Palestinian leader, actually sat at Camp David with Bill Clinton and looked Bill Clinton in the eye and said there was never a Jewish temple in Jerusalem. If there was never a Jewish temple in Jerusalem, then where exactly did Jesus go to pray and teach?
Exactly.
But they're so determined to erase any Jewish connection to this land, that's what they do. So they glorify terror. They incite to terror. They name streets and town squares after Palestinians who kill Israelis. They name sports teams and Boy Scout troops after murderers. They deny any Jewish connection to the land. So a young Palestinian growing up says, hey, making peace with Israel, that's cowardice. That's allowing a usurper, that's allowing a conqueror to get away with stealing our land. And they go out and kill. What they need to know, and what Americans need to know, is the history of the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. The way that the Jewish people have sought at every turn to compromise, make painful compromises with, and make peace with the Palestinians. And they really need to understand the fundamental justice of Israel's right to exist and struggle for survival. That's the history we need to share. That's the history I know can make a difference right here at home, especially on our college campuses where so much nonsense is taught. But my real hope is that it trickles back into the Middle East, and Palestinians stop viewing compromise with Israel as cowardice, but as a virtue and as a necessity.
Well, you mentioned Yasser Arafat, and it's been well documented that he was very clear that anybody that negotiated with Israel gave up anything less than 100% of what they believed was in the best interest of Palestinians was an infidel and deserving of being killed and eradicated. And at several points, there's been opportunity. I think you cite in your book, I think 3 to 5 occasions where Palestinians had a chance to have their own land, and they've just rejected it. They're really not interested in their own land as much as they're interested in Israel no longer existing.
That's exactly right. In the book, I discuss five separate occasions, probably more, but I picked the 5 main ones: 1937, 1947, 1967, 2000, and 2008. Each time the Jews of Palestine and the Israelis offered the Arabs of Palestine, later the Palestinians, a state of their own. And each time the Palestinians rejected it. Sometimes they just rejected it with words, but sometimes they rejected it violently with suicide bombs and stabbings. And so you realize, as much as a lot of people in the prior administration, the Obama administration, as much as a lot of college professors don't want to acknowledge it, this conflict isn't driven by Israel's refusal to compromise. The Israelis have shown time after time after time their willingness to make painful compromises for peace. The conflict is driven by the fact that the Palestinians refuse to accept a Jewish state in that land in any size, shape, or form. Look, I know great Palestinians. I know wonderful Palestinians who want peace. Their leaders, however, have made dreadful mistakes time after time after time. That's why there's still a conflict today.
And as you say, David, the younger generation has been very well indoctrinated to this anti-Israel cause, and that is tough to overcome. We've been doing this for 50 years, and it is the exact, it's the epitome of insanity that's been taking place here. Is that we just do not have the right ground and the right temperament, and I guess the mentality to find peace. There's got to be something in a huge way. Even though we had the 1967 Six-Day War, and I want to talk a little bit more about that and about your book, Reclaiming Israel's History.